as much as it does cost an extra 27 cents a year per person to charge wirelessly your phone, I think if we think about the environmental impact and the toxic waste savings, I think that it actually is a driver of a more sustainable and positive impact on the climate. So I want to talk about something that's really important to me, and I think a lot of people today, which is environmental safety and climate change. And what's the role of wireless power in that? Talk to me a little bit about wired versus wireless charging, and which one's more efficient and better for the planet.
Well, it all depends kind of where you're starting and where you're ending and how big of a piece of the pie you're looking at. Okay. So if you just look at the efficiency of plugging something in versus going through a Qi wireless charging protocol, you're probably going to lose somewhere between 5 to 10% by plugging something in. It's a little bit more complicated than just plugging something in. A lot of times you have regulators on both sides. You're balancing out, the regulation of the supplies. The same thing is happening on a wireless side, and you have an extra conversion where you're converting it to an AC source and putting it over an inductive link. So the overall efficiency might be in the order of 80%, give or take.
But what does that mean from a consumption perspective?
So from a consumption standpoint, I've seen various different estimates. So from a smartphone standpoint, that may boil down to about 2,000 watt hours per year. If you boil that down, what that means to how much is that going to cost from a phone bill standpoint or from an electricity bill standpoint, I think it comes out to about 27 cents per year. So it's really not a whole lot.
All right. So when we start and we say it might be 80% efficient or 5 to 10% less efficient, it sounds like that could be a really big number. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about is the difference of about 27 cents a year for charging a phone wirelessly versus wired. And of course, that does add up. So it's not nothing, but it does put into perspective the difference of energy consumption. So, obviously, energy is a major topic right now, and sources of energy is a main topic. What do you think might happen when we move to more renewable forms of energy? Does that change the equation at all?
Well, I think it changes quite a bit, because the other downside that really doesn't get too talked about by people who are detractors on wireless power, from an efficiency standpoint, there's another problem from an environmental standpoint, and that is all of the cables, all of the adapters that wind up shipping with a lot of products. Now some of these, Apple, for example, isn't shipping adapters in a lot of its smartphones anymore, but still a lot of them do. And the problem is those are winding up in landfills over time because people have so many of them lying around. Between that, cables that get inserted and pulled in and out multiple times, they corrode, they get fouled, they break, they bend, and they wind up in landfills as well. So there's almost a bigger environmental problem with the waste of electronic products than there is with the inefficiencies. And as we move from better renewables, getting away from carbon burning of fossil fuels, really, if you have a solar panel that's creating energy, that's charging, that's a pretty clean process. So that inefficiency really doesn't hurt you from an environmental standpoint, and you're doing it in a way that's not creating more in the way of things that have to get thrown away.
Yeah, so I'll just reinforce that with some facts here. This is from Hewlett-Packard, so they have a major e-waste recycling program. So it's pretty stark, some of the things you're talking about how damaging to the planet e-waste is. So first of all, e-waste is the fastest growing municipal waste stream in America. We have over 3.4 million tons of e-waste every year in America, which is about 50,000 dump trucks worth of electronics, and it makes up 2% of all of the waste that by volume, which is going into the landfills. But even worse than that, it's 70% of the toxic waste is coming from that, because in e-waste you have all sorts of toxic elements like mercury, lead, cadmium, lithium, and obviously you also have rare metals like gold, copper, and silver. The last stat I'll drop on you from this HP research is that if you were able to recycle and harvest all of the precious metals that are getting buried into the earth, it would add up to about $55 billion worth of value in those commodities. So it's a big problem, and like you mentioned, every computer comes with its own power supply. Most cell phones come with their own power supply. And in wireless charging, when you have common infrastructure, like you have a desk that might be in the same place for 10 years, or you have a car that's going to be in service for, on average, about 12 years before the scrap rate factor comes in, you have one charger that can charge 5, 6, 7 generations of phones over the same amount of time that one charger would do it. And if you're like me, you probably have a drawer with a bunch of wires in it. So I guess at least we're not putting it in the landfill, but it's filling our house with just these useless wires that we don't really need. And wireless charging is a major answer to that. And I think, as much as it does cost an extra 27 cents a year per person to charge wirelessly your phone, I think if we think about the environmental impact and the toxic waste savings, I think that it actually is a very big driver of a more sustainable and positive impact on the climate.
I agree. And then, like anything, a lot of times you need to look at the big picture to see what's really going
Sure,
on. I
of
think that's a
course.
perfect example.
Yeah. So on its surface, it is a little bit less efficient, and so you might look at it and say, "Oh, this isn't the right thing." But look at the big picture, looking at the forest instead of focusing on just the individual trees, and you can see how this will create not only great user benefit, better products that don't get thrown out as much, but also just literally eliminating the one-to-one case where every product has to come with its own charger, and that's a game changer.
Yep, very much so.